As we're getting ready to move on to section 3.3, we're going to be working with some different geometry formulas and relationships. So what I was hoping to do is have people make a sheet that they can use to study from with some notes. So what I suggest is get a piece of paper and fold it over so you have about 2/3 covered up and one little narrow margin. What we're going to do here is put down some relationships that we want to learn. Then we'll take our notes on those on the right and make a study sheet so you can kind of quiz yourself and start to memorize any that you don't know at this point. So I will go through and kind of talk about each one and suggest, like I said, that you make some notes either in this kind of column format, or you could use note cards to do the same thing. So these are just different relationships that we're going to need in section 3.3 in order to set up some of the application problems there. So the first formula we need is that of the perimeter of a rectangle. The word perimeter means distance around the outside of any shape. So I can always find the perimeter of a shape by adding up all its sides. So for a rectangle, it will have 2 lengths and it will have 2 widths, and I could just add them up, or I can use the formula which is often used. The perimeter of a rectangle is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. So I have 2 lengths and 2 widths. Perimeter of a triangle would just be adding up all the sides. So if I called a side A and another B and another C, the perimeter would just be adding them up. Right. So let's see, I feel like I didn't write this big enough up here. Let me write it a little bigger to make sure you can see it. Perimeter of a rectangle is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. So there's 2 lengths and 2 widths. All right. Those are the two ones that we're going to come up against when we're working on some problems. And the other relationships that I want to talk about are ones with angles. Angles are measured in degrees, and you might think of a 90-degree angle if you've ever talked about 90-degree angles as like a right angle on the edge of a triangle or the edge of a piece of paper. Whoa, you have a right angle, 90 degrees. Okay. So angles are measured by how wide they are, So if I have a triangle, it would have 3 angles. I'm going to just label them A, B, and C. And if I was going to measure how wide each of those were, if I have a triangle, the measure of its interior angles always adds to 180 degrees. So angles of a triangle add to 180 degrees. That is what I need to know. So if I have a triangle with 3 angles, I can add them together, and that total will be 180. The next relationship is the angles in a quadrilateral. Quadrilateral means a 4-sided figure. So if I have any 4-sided figure, the angles inside it are all going to add up to 360 degrees. So the angles of a quadrilateral add to 360 degrees. So if I label those A, B, C, and D, I know that if I add them up, I'd get 360 degrees. One way I can remember that is one special type of quadrilateral is a rectangle. And I know a rectangle has 4 90-degree angles in it. And if I add 4 90-degree angles, 90 plus 90 plus 90 plus 90, I get 360. And that's one of the ways that I remember that one. Complementary angles means 2 angles that add to 90 degrees. So here's a 90-degree angle, and if I break it up into two separate angles, A and B, if they're complementary angles, that means they're angles that add to 90 degrees. One way I remember that is this right angle that they form is kind of like the letter C. If I tip it sideways, it's kind of like a letter C. And that helps remember complementary 90 degrees. Okay, we have two more relationships. One is supplementary angles. Supplementary angles are angles that add together to make a straight line, which is 180 degrees. So they're angles that add to, 180 degrees. So if I call one A and one angle B, if I add them together, I get 180 degrees. And that would be complementary angles, excuse me. The last relationship that we're going to be using is that for vertical angles. Vertical angles are angles that are opposite each other when two straight lines cross. So if I have two vertical angles, they're going to be equal. So vertical angles are equal. So in this case, angle A equals angle B. And if I looked at these two angles over here and called this one C and this one D, they'd also be equal because they're opposite each other, called vertical angles. So after you have all these notes and have this copied down, what you can do is just fold this over and try to quiz yourself. Perimeter of a rectangle, that's distance around 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. And then I check and make sure I'm right. Perimeter of a triangle, distance around the outside, just add all the sides. I check to make sure. Angles in a triangle, add to 180 degrees. Add to 180. Angles in a quadrilateral, add to 360 degrees. Add to 360. Add them all up. Oops. Complementary angles are angles that add to 90 degrees. I kind of remember that because 90 degrees is kind of like the letter C. Complementary angles. Supplementary angles add to a straight line, which is 180 degrees. So there are two angles that add to 180. And finally, vertical angles are angles across from each other when two straight lines cross, and they're equal to each other. So if you make two lines, the two angles across, the vertical angles are equal. So if you spend a few minutes, several times, going over this, then hopefully you can get these, get familiar with these and start to have them memorized, and then just focus on the ones that you might need a little more practice with. On Monday, we'll start working with these, doing some story problems.